Man, here's the thing that always blows my mind. We live in a time where people scream about women's rights, about equality, about empowerment, right? Everywhere you look, whether it's ads, social media, Hollywood, Instagram, it's all female empowerment. But then when you actually take a step back and look at how women are being treated in practice, it's wild. They're being exploited, objectified, pressured to look a certain way, act a certain way, sexualized just to sell sneakers, cars, even hamburgers. And here's the kicker: society pretends this is freedom. Like, look, you can show your body to millions of strangers. That's empowerment. But the truth is, a lot of this is just a slick rebranding of exploitation. Now, I'm not here saying women shouldn't be free. Of course they should. I've got daughters, man, and I want them to be free, safe, respected, loved, and able to do whatever they want with their lives. But freedom doesn't mean exploitation. Freedom doesn't mean society gets to put this invisible leash on you that says, if you're not hot, if you're not posting thirst traps, if you're not selling some fantasy version of yourself, then you're not valuable. That's not empowerment. That's slavery to the opinions of strangers. And here's where Islam comes into the conversation in such an interesting way. Because the mainstream narrative in the West, especially if you've grown up watching the news post 9/11, is that Islam oppresses women. You hear it all the time. Oh, they're forced to cover. They're not allowed to do this or that. It's so restrictive. But when you actually look into it, when you step outside the sound bites and propaganda, it's almost the opposite. Islam came into a society that really oppressed women, like genuinely treated them as property and flipped the whole thing upside down. It gave them rights that women in the West didn't even dream of until like the last 100 years. So let's go back for a second. Pre-Islamic Arabia, we're talking about 1400 years ago. You had tribes, desert culture, brutal survival stuff. Women back then weren't just second-class citizens, they were literally objects. Men inherited women like you inherit camel. Baby girls were sometimes buried alive because families thought daughters were a burden. Can you even imagine that? A father digging a hole and tossing his baby girl in because society convinced him she was worthless. That was the reality. And then Islam comes along. And the Prophet Muhammad, this guy steps up and says, no more of that. Daughters are a blessing. If you raise them with love, they're your ticket to paradise. That was radical. He gave women inheritance rights. He gave them the right to keep their own money. Think about that for a second. 1400 years ago, while Europe was still debating whether women even had souls, Islam is saying women have property rights, women have economic independence, women can run businesses, women can testify in court, women can choose their husband. Like, it was revolutionary. And I'll tell you, man, I find it so interesting because when you really peel away the layers, Islam has these built-in safeguards against exploitation. Like, let's talk about modesty for a second. People see the hijab or niqab and they go, that's oppression. But if you flip it, isn't it actually the opposite? Instead of being forced to expose your body to constant judgment, the hijab is literally a shield. It says you don't get access to me based on how I look. You have to deal with me based on my character, my mind, my soul. Yeah, that's power, man. That's saying no to the exploitation machine. But in the West, we don't see it like that. We've got this weird paradox where the same society that says don't objectify women is also the one profiting billions off porn, off Instagram ads, where women's bodies are selling protein shakes, OnlyFans, all of it. So which is, are we protecting women or are we just pretending while cashing in on their exploitation? Meanwhile, Islam sets up rules that go, we're not playing that game. Women are not currency for men's desires. Women are dignified, full human beings, and society needs to treat them that way. Now, does every Muslim society live up to that? Of course not. Humans mess up. Culture can distort religion. You've got countries that abuse women in the name of Islam, just like you've got so-called Christian or democratic countries that exploit women in different ways. But if you go back to the source, the Quran, the teachings of the Prophet, it's clear the entire framework is about dignity, balance, and protection from exploitation. Here's another wild example. In a lot of cultures, even today, marriage is basically a contract where the woman gives up her independence. She moves in, she depends on the guy financially, she might lose her name, her identity. But in Islam, marriage is a partnership. A woman keeps her own name. She keeps her property. She doesn't have to spend her money on the husband or kids if she doesn't want to. That's the man's responsibility. The dowry, the mahr, is given to her, not her father, not her family. It's her security. That's like futuristic stuff for the... And when you zoom out, you realize Islam is less about restriction and more about protection. Like, why do you lock your car? Not because you hate your car, but because you value it. Why do you put a password on your phone? Because there's something valuable inside. That's how Islam views women, not as objects to display for strangers, but as beings with immense value who deserve protection from a world that can be predatory. Now, I know when I say that, some people bristle. They're like, well, women don't need protection, they can protect themselves. Sure, women are strong, no question, but let's be real, society is stacked with predators. Look at human trafficking. Look at harassment statistics. Look at how women are targeted in nightlife, in workplaces. The whole Me Too movement exploded because women were finally saying, yeah, we've been exploited forever. And Islam said that 1400 years ago, hey, build a system that minimizes these vulnerabilities. Don't normalize exploitation. Don't normalize treating women like objects. And you can see it historically too. Some of the strongest women in Islamic history were powerhouses. Khadijah, the Prophet's wife, was a businesswoman, way wealthier than him when they got married. She proposed to him, not the other way around. She was like, you're the guy I want. That's agency. Then you've got Aisha, another wife of the Prophet, who became one of the biggest scholars of her time. Men would travel hundreds of miles to learn from her. Like, Islam didn't put women in a box, it opened up doors while putting up guardrails against exploitation. And man, I think about this in comparison to the West all the time. Like, look at our music industry. Look at how female artists are pushed. Half the time, it's not even about the music, it's about how little clothing they're wearing in the video. Well, you can have the best voice in the world, but the label says, yeah, but can you twerk in this outfit? Can you sell sex appeal? That's exploitation disguised as stardom. And then we call it empowerment. But if you sit down and talk to a lot of these women, behind the scenes, they'll tell you how much pressure they're under, how much control the industry has over their image. That's not freedom, that's manipulation. Islam basically said, no thanks, we're not going to play that game. And that's why people misunderstand it. They see the rules, they see modesty, and they think it's about control. But it's not about control. It's about flipping the power dynamic. It's about saying, you don't get to own me with your gaze. You don't get to define my value by my body. I define my own dignity. So when you look at it that way, you start realizing Islam isn't oppressing women. It's actually shielding them from exploitation that's so normalized in modern culture that we don't even notice it anymore. So here's the thing, man. Once you really understand the foundation of Islam's approach to women, you start seeing how the whole system is built to prevent exploitation. Not in some random accidental way, but intentionally, structurally. It's not just about individual rules like cover your hair or don't be alone with a stranger. It's about an entire worldview that says we're not going to let women be reduced to commodities in this society. And that's a radical idea when you compare it to how things operate today. Because let's be honest, the modern world has mastered exploitation. It's polished, it's packaged, it's marketed as liberation. Think about Instagram. It's literally an economy built on women showing themselves to an audience, constantly judged, constantly compared, constantly told you're not good enough unless you filter yourself into some impossible idea. You've got teenagers growing up thinking their worth is in likes and followers. That's exploitation, man. That's a system feeding off insecurity. Islam said we're not doing that. We're going to cut exploitation off at the root. And it did that by shifting the value system. Instead of saying your worth is in how desirable you are, it said your worth is in your faith, your character, your knowledge, your contribution. That's why when the Quran talks about men and women, it always ties dignity to piety, not beauty. That's a huge psychological shift. Now let's talk about modesty in a deeper way, because people really misunderstand it. They think modesty is just about covering your body like a checklist. Is your hair showing? Are your clothes loose enough? But in Islam, modesty is bigger than that. It's an attitude, a way of interact. It's about not putting yourself in situations where you're objectified. It's about men lowering their gaze too. It's not just on women. People forget that. The Quran first tells men to lower their gaze before it tells women to dress modestly. That's Islam saying, hey guys, control yourself, respect women, don't turn them into objects in your head. That's revolutionary because it shifts responsibility away from victim blaming and onto men to behave like decent human beings. And here's something that fascinates me when you talk to women who choose hijab or niqab. A lot of them describe it as freedom. It's not about hiding, it's about owning their space. One woman I talked to said, when I wear hijab, people have to talk to me like a person. They don't start with my body, they start with my words. That's deep, man. That's taking control away from exploitative systems and putting it back in her hands. But let's zoom out beyond modesty. Islam put protections in place across the board. Look at economics. In Islam, a woman's money is her money, period. Nobody can take it from her. Not her husband, not her father. If she wants to spend it, cool. If she wants to keep it, that's her right. Meanwhile, the man has the responsibility to that flips the script from so many cultures where women get exploited financially, expected to work, expected to contribute, but without security. Islam literally says, no, the burden of provision is on men. Women's wealth is untouchable, and that extends to things like inheritance. Was it equal to men's inheritance? No. But here's the context. Men had financial responsibilities, women didn't. So her half share wasn't a downgrade, it was extra security without obligations. That's a nuance people miss when they just pull out the half share soundbite. They forget the system it fits into. Now let's talk about family, because that's another huge space where exploitation can creep in. In a lot of societies, women are pressured to be everything: breadwinner, housekeeper, mother without recognition, or Islam structured family roles in a way that gave women respect and rights inside the home. Being a mother, for example, isn't seen as just unpaid labor, it's honored. The Prophet Muhammad literally said, paradise lies at the feet of mother. That's not poetry. That's prioritizing motherhood as one of the highest roles a human being can play. And that gives women dignity, not just duty. And check this. Islam also set rules to stop exploitation in marriage. A woman can't be forced to marry. Consent is essential. She gets a dowry, which is her safety net. She can negotiate conditions in the marriage contract. She can seek divorce if the marriage becomes harmful. Compare that to so many cultures, even Western ones historically, where women were Islam said, nope, marriage is partnership, not ownership. But here's where it gets even more interesting. In Islam, exploitation isn't just about women being exploited by men. It's also about women being exploited by systems. Economic, cultural, societal. So Islam tackles that too. It doesn't just regulate personal relationships. It builds a whole society that discourages exploitation. That's why you've got rules about fair trade, about charity, about not flaunting wealth, about not creating environments where envy and greed drive exploitation. It's holistic. And when you think about women historically in Islam, you see examples that break every stereotype. Like Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet. She was outspoken, strong, not afraid to challenge authority. Or Umara, who literally fought in battles alongside men to defend the community. Or Al-Shifa, who was a market inspector in Medina, basically running consumer protection. These aren't oppressed women locked away, they're leaders. But here's the difference. They operated within a system that valued their contributions without exploiting their image. Now, let's contrast that with today's empowerment. You've got women CEOs, politicians, influencers, right? But how often do they still get reduced to their looks? A female candidate gives a brilliant speech, and the headline is, what was she wearing? That's exploitation. It doesn't matter how high you climb, the system still pulls you down to appearance. Islam saw that trap and said, we're not going there. We're going to build a society where women's worth isn't chained to appearance. And man, I think this is where modern society could learn from Islam. Because look at the consequences of our so-called liberation. mental health crises, eating disorders, body dysmorphia, sky-high rates of harassment, porn addiction, reshaping how men see women, kids getting exposed to hypersexualized content before they even hit puberty. That's exploitation on steroids. And Islam's framework, if applied properly, basically immunizes society against that. Now, don't get me wrong, no system is perfect in practice. Muslim-majority countries today aren't shining examples. You see cultural baggage, corruption, patriarchy hiding behind religion. But that's people failing, not the religion itself. Go back to the source texts, the actual teachings, and you see a vision that's way ahead of its time. And that's what fascinates me, man. Because here's a religion that 1400 years ago said, we're going to protect women from being used, from being bought, from being sold, from being reduced to their bodies, from being financially exploited, from being silent. And yet, in the modern world, people look at it and go, oh, that's oppression. Meanwhile, they ignore the exploitation machine they live in every single day. That's cognitive dissonance at its finest. So here's where I land on this. Islam's rules aren't about oppression. They're about protection. They're about building a society where women don't have to play by exploitative rules to survive or succeed. And yeah, it looks different from Western freedom, but maybe different isn't bad. Maybe different is necessary. Maybe it's time we admit that the current system is failing women in 1,000 subtle ways, and that Islam, properly understood, might actually have some answers. And I'll close with this thought. Real freedom isn't being free to sell yourself to the highest bid. Real freedom is being free from exploitation altogether. And Islam, with all its structure and guidance, offers women exactly that.